Brent here with Bring Your Own Tools, and on today's episode, if you want to see how we refinish this beautiful bar top from what it looked like before to what it looks like now, keep on watching. Let's get started.
Now, as you can see, this bar top has been well used for years and it needs a full refinish. However, we're gonna make this thing look brand new by sanding it, staining it, and finishing it properly. So, let's get to it. Now, one of the main things to keep in mind when doing a project like this is to have a good quality sander, because you wanna make sure you take quick work of getting all this loose material off of these wood boards. So I have a perfect sander for this project. Number one, it has a turbo mode, which makes this work a lot easier, as well as it's connected to a shop vac. Now, a shop vac makes quick work due to the fact that it literally sucks up all that dust that the sanding process would leave behind if you didn't have a shop vac connected. So, note to self. Let's get to it.
The first grit I use for the sanding process is 80 grit, which takes off this material extremely quickly, as you can see. For this first pass, I'm following with the grain direction. And as a quick side note, if you do want a more stable working environment, make sure you get some bench cookies like this, because those things are extremely valuable and, as you can see, keep this wood slab rock solid. Now, from my understanding, this old finish is most likely an old stain with a polyurethane finish, and after a lot of abuse of moisture, it's basically just peeling off. Therefore, it's extremely easy to remove, especially with this table being made of such a soft wood. Once I have the top layer completely removed, I then proceed to sanding the sides. Now this, again, very straightforward. Just try and do large passes to have an even feel all the way across. This project was actually for a restaurant in my local area, and inevitably they actually had quite a few of these tops, as you can see. Yeah, there was a lot of sanding involved, and luckily I enjoy sanding, but there's only so much sand you can take. It's now time for our second pass, and I'm going from 80 grit to 100 grit to 150 grit sandpaper. Now, sanding is pretty straightforward, so let's go ahead and give a big special thank you to our sponsor this week, KiwiCo. And they have an amazing product line of very unique engineered products that inspire young innovators. I find it so important to work with your hands, especially as a kid, and I love building and creating. These boxes are so much fun that I personally actually enjoyed putting this whole pencil sharpener together. And yeah, this one might be a little bit advanced, but they have plenty of options to choose from ages 2 months to 102 years. Let's be honest, hopefully I'm still building at that age. As of right now, they are offering 30% off your first month trial, and if you like it, go ahead and subscribe for more. Just type in LEARN30 at checkout and click the link in the description of this video if you're so interested. I always want to help promote learning to my personal daughter, and as you can see, she's ready to get to work. When can I get you in the wood shop? Now let's get to the project at hand. I'm stopping at 150 grit sandpaper because the fact that we're going to be pouring an epoxy based resin over the top of it, and therefore the smoothness really won't matter. And in personal preference, if you would to put an oil base or a polyurethane base on this top, I'd suggest a 200 or 250 grit sandpaper. As for the profile, if you wanted a rounded surface, you could always use a roundover bit on your router. However, for these tables, we are going with a sharp corner, and I'm just smoothing them over for a nice feel and touch. At this point, we need to clean the wood top surface, and I always suggest using mineral spirits with a clean lint-free cloth. Wipe off the surface in its entirety, and as you can see, it picks up plenty of miscellaneous dust particles. However, I actually let it dry and then proceed to using a tack cloth to remove all the excess, because there is still quite a bit of dust and debris on this wood top, as you can see. As for stains, there are a plethora to choose from. However, I always suggest an oil-based stain because it generally find that it soaks in more thoroughly and more evenly than other stains. This is by far one of my favorites because it's from General Finishes and it is the candlelight version of it. In all honesty, I don't know why they went with the terminology candlelight, but the color itself is more of a dark, rich brown to reddish tone, which is what we were trying to match to in the existing restaurant. I apply the stain evenly with a foam brush and then let it set in for approximately 5 minutes. After that, I then proceed to taking a clean lint-free cloth and removing all of the excess stain. I generally recommend using one cloth to remove the majority of the stain and then go back and use a clean cloth just to get up what the previous cloth left behind. And one thing not to forget about is the fact that you want to let it dry for a couple hours before you move on to your clear coat. Now this specific mirror coating is from System 3 and it is a perfect little 2-part tabletop epoxy, but just note that it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, so you do have to measure it out evenly in order to have the proper mixing ratio. As for any epoxy mixture, you obviously want to take the time and due diligence to mix thoroughly so it sets properly. Now the first coat that I'm actually using and applying to the tabletop is actually more of a set coat. It's a thin coat that I want to encapsulate the entire surface because I want to encapsulate that stain as well as any of the miscellaneous particles that are on that finish to be set in place. That way, if there are particles, they remain low and won't screw up your finish overall in the end. Now I use a foam roller to apply this finish coat because it gives me a very nice consistent look, as well as you don't have to worry about any of the particles left behind from your traditional roller. I let the epoxy become tacky to the touch but not dry. At that point I know it's ready for a flood coat, and therefore I mix up a sizable batch of epoxy and then proceed to pouring it over the entire top surface. I do use the occasional plastic spreader to evenly distribute the epoxy over the tabletop, especially if you have a large amount, but I suggest doing that at the very beginning and then using your roller to roll over the entirety of the surface. In some cases, as you can see on the edge, it's actually so dry on the end grain that it actually soaked up the original epoxy seal coat and left 2 different looks. However, luckily with our flood coat, we're able to encapsulate that area, and the fact that we have so much epoxy on top as well as on the sides will leave us a good finish in the end if you apply enough epoxy. As for epoxy drips, I then take either a piece of wood or just my finger and wipe down all the drips evenly and consistently all the way around. Just make sure you come back to these tabletops after an hour or so and remove the remaining drips that come back from the dead, because they will tend to come back until it's at least a little tacky. At this point in time, I proceed to finishing off the remaining tables that I have and let them dry for at least 24 hours. Then we can come back and enjoy the fact that these tables are done. As you can see, these tables truly came back to life, and that's what I love about restoration. You can turn something that looks horrid and should be thrown away to something that is beautiful and can be loved and cherished for years to come. And that's what I call one beautiful, sexy beast. Oh yeah.